I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say this, but enough. The devaluation of video games in an attempt to generate higher revenues to match higher development costs has gone on for far too long now. DLC, season passes, online passes, pre-order exclusives, microtransactions, subscription fees, and the latest, loot boxes. Faced with ever-increasing development costs and an inability to expand the base they sell games to, Western AAA publishers are sinking ever lower in their attempts to milk the base they do have and generate more revenue. It's sickening, and there is no defense possible for the kind of abusive practices that are best characterized by a game like Star Wars Battlefront 2, which is currently caught in the midst of a backlash thanks to its egregious monetization, although EA and DICE have currently paused microtransactions for now. This is truly the end game of Western AAA that Nintendo tried to warn against years ago. More sophisticated hardware, a never-ending arms race for better-looking and more technically sophisticated games, rising costs, studio closures, publisher buyouts, games bombing even after selling millions, and a race to the bottom in trying to monetize a user base. But look, I can almost understand why publishers are doing what they're doing. Games are getting more and more expensive to make as time goes on, and the user base they sell to is not expanding linearly with their costs. Unless users are happy with mid-tier AA games like Persona 5 and NieR Automata, this arms race is not going to end. And by the way, I am happy with those games. They're among the 2 best games of this year. The problem is, most of the larger audience wouldn't be happy with anything less than the latest graphics telling an epic story. So what do publishers do then? Of course they have no choice but to try and leverage as much revenue from the base they do have as possible, right? And hence we get this nonsense. But I have a compromise. A compromise for publishers. Raise the price of games. Raise it to $80. Now, many of you either blanched at reading that sentence or got really angry, or closed this video in disgust. But if you're still listening, let me explain. Video games have cost $60 since 2005 now, when the Xbox 360 first came on the scene. Development costs have risen exponentially since then, and this is without factoring in inflation over the last 12 years. Simply put, we are paying far less relative to purchasing parity and development costs now than we ever have before. We are ignoring the average rate of inflation, which has been roughly 2.4% on average annually in the US for the last 10 years. And not accounting for how steeply costs have risen with the advent of HD consoles, of course it's financially non-viable for developers to sell a game at $60 and leave it at that, right? Okay, so raise it to $80. Do it. But that comes with the understanding that if these publishers do this, they will not shoehorn any of your other bullshit into this game. No microtransactions, no loot boxes, no car passes, online passes, piecemeal DLC, none of that. Feel free to sell expansions and content packs if they want to, but no more nickel and diming, no more exploiting their customers, and no more taking us for a ride. No more devaluing their own game and the work of their developers. We pay them $80 once, and that extra $20 you get per copy is an insurance we pay to ensure that they don't continue to ruin our games. So what do publishers get out of this? Why would they go for a one-time cost, admittedly an increased one, rather than the recurrent purchasing and revenue? Well, because my belief truly is that it will balance out for them in the end. Look, by charging $80 up front, they get an extra $20 from everyone who buys the game, rather than getting $60 from everyone who buys the game, and then $30 for the season pass from a fraction of that user base, or recurring spending on microtransactions from an even smaller pool of people who bought the game. Recurrent spending spreads out the revenues over time, sure. So more stability and income in terms of your financial statements too. But in the end, by ensuring an additional $20 from every purchaser, you are still getting the same amount of money in the end, just up front. Hell, since they're getting an extra $20 from everyone who buys the game, they might even earn more in the end. There's the benefit for them. It's not just that either though. They avoid the intangibles this way too. No bad PR, no backlash, no negative publicity, no disenchanted developers, and no brand devaluation. And if this leads to a net increase in their total revenues, which maybe, it's unclear if it would, then maybe they even feel bolder in terms of making less homogenized games, trying out different things, and not just putting a different variation of the same thing to the market once a year, every year. Now, to be very clear, I'm not asking for every game to be $80, only the ones that feel it necessary to nickel and dime a customer to achieve profitability and growth. If your game is so expensive that you don't see how it'll make money without you shoehorning in microtransactions and loot boxes or exploitative season passes, well, don't. Charge $80 once and be done with it. Games that right now can afford to be single-player titles without inane monetization policies, like Wolfenstein, The Evil Within, Prey, Persona 5, and NieR Automata, these titles too should remain $60. And if they can be profitable at $60 now, they'll have no problem being profitable at $60 then. And in fact, by being at a slightly lower price point, they might even induce people to pick them up by looking like a better value in comparison to the $80 games. I also don't want this to mean the end of meaningful post-launch add-on content. If The Witcher 3 charges me $80, I don't want it to mean CDPR can't sell an expansion pass with Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone, because that's meaningful add-on content that earns the extra money, after the base game has already earned the $80 to begin with. The same goes for Horizon, which had great post-launch DLC support too. But that's as much leeway as I'm willing to give, so publishers, here's the compromise. Stop ruining our games, and the games your developers spend years of their lives working on. Stop nickel and diming your customers. Stop feeding the spiral that will inevitably lead to a crash of the AAA market. Just stop. Instead, charge us $80 per game, once, up front. There, you made your extra money honestly, without having to resort to scamming your players. As for us, the players, the people who play the games, that additional $20 per game will sting, but think of it as an insurance policy that we're going to pay to ensure that the specter of abusive monetization is kept away from our games forever. It's not a win-win situation, but it's the only fix to this mess that we can see for the time being.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.